Okay. Uh, Good evening, everybody, and welcome to the 11th episode. And I can't even believe that we are already 11 episodes old. 11th webinar of what we call YouTooCanRun shares. The idea of these webinars is to share knowledge from the best in the field of running. And normally we do it on Wednesdays, but it was very difficult to get hold of a very elite panel of speakers that we have put together today. And we moved our regular date to a Sunday evening. I hope it was not inconvenient for you all. And we have today a eminent panel. Let me introduce. But before that, for those who don't know who we are a sports management company. We have about 10 products. We like to think that we are everything in running. We do things for event organizers. We do things for brands. We do things for trainers. We do things for the entire ecosystem. We used to organize the India Running Summit, which used to be a body platform to share knowledge. But after things have become digital, it's become easier, and now we are able to get experts from all over the world. And literally today they're from all over the world on one screen, and get an audience like you from all over the world, and all be together. So thank you very much. Good evening. First, I will have the pleasure of introducing ladies first. Okay, so. So welcome Tvisha to the forum. For those who don't know, Dr. Tvisha Parikh is a runner, not a very professional runner. She's an apologetic runner, because she says, "Oh, I don't run as much as you." But there's nothing that defines a runner. Okay, if you put on two shoes and you think you're a runner, you're a runner. There is no card, there is no ID card for a runner. Okay, and she did a doctorate for many runners who are from Ashnath background. She did a doctorate with Kannan Purendi in Chennai. Many of Ashnath's teams have gone and met her, so probably many of you know her from your Chennai days, and we have a lot of viewers who come from Chennai here. And Tvisha is now part of the team with Dr. Contractor as Sir H.N. Reliance. Always keep forgetting the Sir bit. Sir H.N. Reliance Hospital, which is one of the best sports medicine outfit in India. I have taken two foreigners there, and both of them have said that you got everything here that we don't see anywhere in the world put together at one place. One of them was Phil Maffetone, whom I took there. So welcome to the panel, Tvisha. Thank you. We next have, again, ladies first. Okay, not in any order of seniority. We have Leandi, and Leandi is an South African. She's a strength and training coach at HN Reliance. Works with some of the India's Olympic athletes in strength training, coaching, conditioning. And Leandi is going to tell us about how strength coaching is, very useful and very important when you're getting back to running. So today's entire forum is about getting back to running. And she's joining us, of course, from Ghatkoper. And Tvisha is this. But joining us from Johannesburg is Christopher Pedra. And Christopher has been in Bombay before. He's kind of following the footsteps from the Kokila Bain to. He's also going to be part of the team at Sir H.N. Reliance. And for those who know Heath Matthews, he's kind of following the footsteps of Heath Matthews. And he's going to tell us about injury management, physiotherapy. So we have a very excellent evening. I've been able to see some of the presentations, and I can tell you that many of them were revealing to me. I consider myself as being well ready, well studied, and this. But some of the presentations were really very nice, and I'm very happy, and I hope that the audience also benefits from this entire presentation. We have the chat window. I can see the chat. Thank you, Radha. Thank you, Amit Yadav. Thank you, Dr. Shirish Kataria. Thank you, Prashant Kotari from Jalgaon. Thank you, Mohsin Khan from, he was with Sham Wallabji. So thank you very much. Thank you, everybody. If there are any questions, let them pile up. We'll take all the questions together. Thank you, Kumar Janardhanan from Chennai. Thank you very much, Dr. Kumar Janardhanan. I'm sorry. So thank you, everybody. And Tvisha, I just wanted to, ask you before you get on with the formal presentation. I mean, what do you think is the biggest thing that you see runners doing after the pandemic? What is your top concern about runners doing after the pandemic? It's all opened up now. You can go running. In Bombay, they have this strange 2-kilometer rule. But what are runners doing wrong?
Yeah, so actually I am addressing that. That's probably one of the first things I'm talking about in the slide. And I think I'm addressing all of those points. So let's do it in a systematic fashion if
that'd be nice.
You want to do it.
Yeah. Lady, when did you come to India, Lady?
About 6 years ago.
Wow, you have been here for 6 years. You are now more of an Indian.
A little bit, yeah.
Okay. Yeah. And how has your experience been here?
That's amazing. I really love India. I have a really big place. India is a big place in my heart. I love the athletes here. I've not seen such dedication in athletes that I've seen from Indian athletes. So I really, really love Indian athletes, and I love where Indian sport is going. I think there's a lot of people who are doing a great job in making sport go ahead in India especially. So yeah, I'm really excited about the opportunities that is here, and how well Indian athletes are doing currently and will do hopefully in the future.
Fantastic. Dr. Contractor keeps telling me about the things that he's doing, and I know that the Reliance Foundation, Sports Foundation, has taken up a lot of kind of leadership role or a stewardship role, if one may call that. And I'm happy that some large group like that has come forward and is doing a lot for sports science, sports medicine, and for generally improving the condition of athletic training in India. Thank you very much for being part of the efforts of our country to hopefully get some more medals in our Olympics in the future. Thank you very much. Dr. Pedra, you have been in India before, you've been here for a long time. So what has been your experience in India? I know that you worked for about 10 years in Johannesburg before you came here. So how has your experience been there versus here?
Completely different experience. I wouldn't say better or worse, but I must say, following on from what Leandi said there about the Indian athletes, and I would expand that further to your average Indian who just wants to be active. That's been one of the biggest things for me, I think, moving to India, is how many people are out and about, how many people are walking, running, cycling, in the parks. And that for me is amazing. That's different from anywhere else I've ever been. And I think it's an amazing opportunity for all of us in the sort of sports medicine and the sports health community, I suppose you can call it, to be able to assist such an eager population. So that's something that I'm really enjoying doing, is being able to help people, everyday athletes. Obviously the elite guys, it's great. You do want India to get more medals, and that's a huge part of what motivates me as well, because plainly the fact that India hasn't done that well at the Olympics is crazy, considering the resources, the numbers of athletes and the talent. But I think your average sort of social runner, for example, all the guys listening today, it's an amazing population that we can hopefully have a big impact on just by giving them, basic, simple information that, maybe isn't readily available at the moment.
Thank you, Doctor. Yes, I know that. He dropped off. I know that. Recreational running is expanding. When we started YouTooCanRun about 6 years back, we had 200 events. At that point of time, I used to think that I knew all the running events all over the country. And now, last year, 2019, we were 1,400 events. We map all the events across the country by numbers, by whether they are how many athletes and time finishers. We have the entire data of the ecosystem, and that is what we do, and that is how it has grown. So earlier I would think that I would know everything in India. Then about 2-3 years back, I would say that I knew all the running events in Bombay. But today I can't tell you the running events that happened in Bandra, Kurla, my part of the suburb. It's so much. And now with this COVID, everything has become virtual. So you don't even know who's the organizer and who's the running event and who's running what event, and some certificate pops up on your face that somebody completed some event, and I'm just wondering, where this is going to go. And all the more reason why we need webinars like this, because we need to put out that word of caution. Because once a runner gets injured, he's a negative ambassador for the sport. He says, "Oh, don't take up running; it's bad for your knees," something like that. And that's very harmful, and that is not at all desirable. Welcome back, Pedra. We lost you. I think you dropped out. Okay. So anyway, so coming back, let's start with the show. And Tvisha, if you can pull up your presentation, we will all go out of the spotlight, and the screen is all yours.
Sure, thank you. Just do that. Hello. So at the outset, thank you, Mr. Venkat, for getting this organized, and thank you for the introduction. And I must say that by starting this YouTooCanRun, you've also been really influential, and I myself have been looking at the website since I started running about 6-7 years back, and always look for updates and stuff on there. So that's been great as well. So very good evening again to everyone here. So what I'll be talking about today will be on maximizing safety during return to running in the COVID-19 environment. I believe a lot of you have already started running. Everybody's been reading a lot on the safety issues and a lot of issues related to running online. A lot of the people in the crowd, I understand, are doctors today. And so everybody has their 2 cents to share on this. So what I'm going to do in the next 10-12 minutes is share my understanding, what I have gathered over the last 3 to 4 months, and with my sports medicine background and entire medical background, what can I put forth as to when it comes to the safety levels and everything to do during this COVID. So first thing, of course, all of us know that the routine of 2019 is no longer the routine anymore. And with that, what I mean, something that Mr. Venkat was asking, when people say they are used to running at a particular time of the day, at a particular place, which is probably more than 2-3 kilometers away from home, in a nice location in the city, which people often have been doing in Mumbai, running with their particular group. All those things, unfortunately, cannot remain the routine with all the restrictions, etc., which are coming up. And what would be the correct thing to do is that, like we have adjusted for a lot of other things in our daily living, is about adjusting to this new routine for running as well. So is the new routine for running being masked and doing solitary running, or is it something else? Again, I think a lot of you who have already started running some of you have already adjusted to this mask and solitary running, whereas some people are still confused. And I think the confusion is mostly because of the reports that have been coming out over the last 2.5 months. There's a weekly some or the other update which comes, which kind of confuses everyone, including us. So whether when it comes to the air movement, etc., and what is what's confusing is the other sports, especially contact sports like soccer, etc., have started in full swing, and they probably, it's the contact sports, so they know it's not solitary and they're not using masks. So let's try and decipher this confusion as best as we can. I'm sharing here something from the Texas Medical Association. What they've done is they've grouped all the activities, common activities of daily living, from low risk to high risk. And like we can see, going for a walk, run with others is classified as given a rating of 3, which means it's something like a moderate to low risk activity, which is similar to, the risk is similar to grocery shopping, but it's higher than playing tennis, but it's much lower than playing soccer. So whole on whole, what we are saying is that there is a moderate to low level of risk involved, and we need to be careful. So with this in mind, I'll just proceed further. Just before proceeding, I'll have a little disclaimer kind of a thing to say that, our medical understanding of COVID has really evolved in the last 4-5 months. Scientists have just in a short span got to know so much. But it's been dynamic to some extent, and that's how medical science and research has been. I mean, we've seen it, when it came to barefoot running, short running, when it came to carbs versus fats, and a lot of the other things. Things have been a little up and down because science is like that, it's dynamic. So what I want to say is that what we are probably talking today, what our understanding is today, and what it could be when we've understood much more about the disease 3 months later or maybe a year later, there could be a difference. So let's be open to this. Let's try and keep ourselves as updated as possible. From our end, we would also like to, keep updating with more and more webinars, but just wanted to put this first point across. Few things which are kind of no confusion, non-controversial when it comes is hand hygiene. So as a runner, when do you have to be extremely mindful about this? Obviously, when you leave the house, when you come back, doing this hand hygiene, making sure that you're not, as far as possible, touching anything on the roads, etc. when you're running. And if you are, you're following hand hygiene practices by using a sanitizer, washing your hands. And another very important thing I would say is handshakes. You're out there on the road after 3 months running and you see an old buddy, refrain from handshakes and hugs. Okay, so that's the one thing that we might in the emotional part of it forget, but yeah, that's we're kind of putting this rule for all of us, all other sports, that no high fives allowed, no handshakes allowed. So that continues as far as the sporting and running thing. This is almost a non-controversial thing, hand hygiene, very clear. Next, little confusing thing has been the physical distance. Of course, it's very clear that crowding again complicates the situation. So that's a no-brainer. Crowds like this have to be avoided. You have to be, as far as possible, maintaining physical distance, bare minimum of 6 feet. Now, with the whole physics of, how does the air move while you're running and how is the air behaving around you, there have been reports which have said that up to 4 to 5 meters distance should also be maintained. Again, this report came out a few months back, and then we've again gone back, and the latest June 30th report would say something like 6 feet is enough. So like I said, there's a little bit of back and forth. So the safest is, I would say, as far as possible, choose a non-peak time and area for running, ensuring that you have at least 6 feet, but if you have more, consider yourself to be safer. One thing that they found is that obviously when somebody is running, you are at risk by somebody who's running in front of you because of the air which he has breathed out. So if you're running behind, there's a little higher risk. So it's better to run side by side, parallelly, rather than running one behind the other. And the last thing I would say, whatever activity needs to be done outside, do it outside. But if there's something like stretching and strengthening which can be managed at home, which say you were earlier doing in a group outside, today, even if you do it in a group with physical distance, there's still probably a minuscule chance because we don't know exactly. So if possible, try and do it at home. I understand this whole thing of maintaining this physical distance, doing solitary running is taking away our entire, the psychology out of the sports and the running, that, meeting your friends, being in a group, enjoying the group harmony. But I think with all the adjustments that we are making, this is also an adjustment we need to make. So physical distance is again a almost a no-brainer. It's just the confusion is a little bit on how much distance do we maintain. So bare minimum would be 6 feet. Next, I think I already saw some questions coming up on YouTube on the masks thing. So yes, that's obviously been the big discussion in the last few months. So first, let's take masks, yes or no. So yes, you would want the mask from the point of view of protection. Yes, again, there have been talks that if you're running, how much, the air is moving, etc. So, do we really need this protection? So yes, to talk on that, there's been certain reports from Singapore where they've clearly kind of said that if you are maintaining physical distance, then you probably don't require the mask. So physical distance is given they go hand in hand. So if you're maintaining physical distance, you could do away with the mask. So if you find yourself running in a space where there is nobody whom you can see, you probably are free to pull down your mask a little bit, but it's about pulling down the mask or probably putting it safely wrapped in a cover or something in your pockets. You want to still carry your mask with you even if you're running alone, because in any event, especially if you're going to be in India and especially if it's going to be metros like Bombay or Chennai or Hyderabad, Bangalore, anything, you don't know when somebody pops up from somewhere and suddenly you're in a crowd or something. So you want to keep the mask handy. But you may pull it down if you are increasing your speed a little bit or if you don't see anybody around. So that was from the protection point of view. Coming from the breathability issues, of course, that's the big risk of having the mask on, that, we're finding it difficult to breathe. I happened to speak to a very senior pulmonologist from Mumbai who is a marathoner, full marathoner himself. And he agreed that there is a risk when you're going to use masks and be running at high intensity of exercise, high intensity paces. And yes, there can be barotrauma. We have seen some initial reports which came on, which, when people were not extremely careful. So that brings us to the topic of, what type of mask and what should we do with it. So obviously, I think most of you must have figured out that the cloth mask is not very feasible, because if you're going to sweat, then it becomes wet, and then it's wrong to use a wet mask. That's the guidelines, definitely, that it's wrong to use a wet mask. N95 again is very restrictive, so not recommended if you're going to do anything more than a slow walk. So if it's going to be jogging, running, N95 is not really recommended because of the restriction that it causes. And so that leaves us in the in-between space of, where we have the surgical masks. So between the surgical masks, yes, between the qualities, people, I think, just need to experiment a little bit and figure out. But I think that's the safest zone, which provides you protection, still allows you to breathe. And that's kind of the middle zone that we have there. And the most important thing with running with the mask on is that there is going to be some restriction. So make sure that you listen to your body. You adjust the intensity of your runs. And I think mostly everybody is recommending that compared to what you were doing back in February, you should reduce your intensity a little bit, because there is going to be some restriction. There's no doubt about it. Now, if you're pulling down your mask and then running, then can you increase your intensity? Yes. So maybe you can try it at that time. But as a rule, if you have the mask on, bring down the intensity a little bit, use your heart rate, use RPE, which is the rate of perceived exertion, which we commonly use in sports science. Use those markers and take it from there. The last point which I've mentioned here is about awareness. And, that's one of the reasons I really prefer using a mask, advising people to use a mask is, imagine you're running, you've gone into that Zen zone of running and something happens, there's a fluff of hair which comes, you touch your face, For just something as simple as that, you want a mask on, because it just makes you aware that, yes, now I'm not supposed to touch my face. So because of that simple reason, I would say have that mask on. And so, yeah, I think I'll move on from the masks. Coming to the infectivity of the sweat and the spit. So infectivity of sweat, pretty much most reports have not found any kind of infectivity in the sweat. As regards the spit, not the saliva per se, but because somebody might tend to bring out some secretions from the back of the nose or from the lung or something. Yes, spit is definitely going to be considered to be infective. That's a no-brainer again. And yes, so if, when we talk of using masks, it's obviously protecting ourselves from somebody who, it may not be a runner, but just a random guy who probably spat on the road as well. So it's protection from all of these. Again, an absolute no-brainer is that we need to build our immunity, okay? And I would say it's obviously taken a lot of hoo-ha with COVID, but this was something that we have to do just even otherwise, with or without COVID. Specifically with COVID, what I want to re-stress on is that overtraining and sleep deficit reduces your immunity. So even suppose if you're eating your vitamin C tablets, you're having the amlas and the orange juice to build up your immunity, you're having your turmeric water, etc., etc. But if you're not sleeping well, if you are, on Netflix, blah, blah, and if you're not getting the right amount of sleep, that still does reduce your immunity. And overtraining, so if you're coming back from a lag of 3 months, you don't want to start at where you stopped in February, because if you start that now, it can probably be overtraining. So make sure on these aspects. The second aspect is that monsoon is here in majority of parts of the country, and in general with monsoon comes increase in infections. So it may not just be COVID, but it could be just any other infection. So you just still want to build your immunity. As regards COVID with monsoon, there has this, I just read something today morning that scientists feel that the humidity might cause the virus to not, go away from the surface as quickly as it used to. So we're not sure on this as yet, but mentally we can just be prepared that yes, there's probably going to be increase in infectivity. So you still want to continue to build your immunity. Now, all these things that I spoke so far were mostly common for everyone. Few things where things become different, where you need individual attention, would be if you're having comorbidities, if you're having a chronic respiratory illness, anything from asthma to a COPD or any kind of other lung disease. If you're having compromised immunity for any reason, if you're taking some steroids, if you are for any other reason, for a rheumatoid arthritis or anything like that, or if you're even having compromised immunity because of a non-COVID flu, so all of these factors need to be considered while you're doing your running. Of course, if you have got COVID or you have had a contact, all of these should be considered, and I would recommend the safest would be to seek medical consultation in these situations. As regards comorbidities, it's the confusing thing, as I would like to, say with the song, it's with or without you. If you are exercising, you're going out, you are at a small risk because you're just stepping out. But if you're not exercising, whether it's your sugars are not under control, if you're a cardiac patient, things are not good because you're not exercising, and we know that exercise is a necessary part of the treatment. So you still want to do it. You just have to figure out with a doctor probably which is the best and the safest way you can do it. So that was from the comorbidities point of view. The other things are basics, like have you been a regular runner before the lockdown? If you are not and you have just decided that, August of 2020 is my 50th birthday and I'm going to start running in August 2020. If you're somebody like that, I would say again, take it slow, seek medical consultation. It's not a wrong time to start, but you just want to be sure that you have all your bases cleared. If you were a runner, but your physical activities dropped drastically during the lockdown, please be aware that there's something called detraining, and 12 weeks is more than enough to detrain. So you want to start systematically for sure, not just from the injury point of view, which Chris is going to speak and Leandi is going to address, but even from the cardiovascular point of view. The whole detraining has set in. So please make sure you're starting off slowly. And finally, just because COVID has come in, it's not that all our previous risk factors have gone away. COVID has just added another thing, So if you had any other risks as far as running was concerned, for which you would have normally sought, consultation from an exercise physician or a sports physician, those precautions and factors and safety measures still need to be followed. They cannot be ignored. COVID has just added things, one more thing that we need to be careful about. So please be aware that if there is a medical issue, you can still be at risk of some kind of cardiac, mishap, or you can still be at risk of a heat stroke. Of course, the weather is getting better, but all those things still remain. Briefly to talk on what happens after a COVID infection, very recently the British Journal of Sports Medicine put this up as a graduated return to play protocol for somebody who's infected. Of course, it's a detailed plan they've put out. What I really want to highlight is a couple of things. One, that it is having to be under medical supervision if you have got a COVID infection. There is a minimum 10 days to 17 days period, and in fact most reports said 3 weeks is the bare minimum that you would require. And they still stress that if the athlete has comorbidities, they should be under they should have a complete medical assessment before returning to play. So all I want to highlight with this is that if there's any kind of issue, please seek medical advice. And discuss, chart out the plan with your medical professional or any health professional. To sum up, I have just put together something like a checklist for before stepping out of the house, during run, and coming back. So this is the checklist before you step out of the house. Am I feeling well? Is everyone in my contacts well? If there is any kind of doubt in this, for your own safety and for the community's safety, it's best that you try and do something in the house, take a couple of days break, make sure that you're completely well before you step out. Hygiene, washing of hands, everything before you stepping out of the house, important. You don't know whether you are still in the in the carrier stage of infection, you're not started showing anything. So just in case you step out and you happen to touch a wall or your lift buttons, whatever. So from that point of view, hygiene again, paramount importance. Carry a mask for sure. You may not put it on depending on what is the crowd around you. I would say still put it on for a little bit. So carry a mask for sure. Carry a small sanitizer bottle for sure. Try and skip any extra gadgets if they are avoidable, because that decreases the chances of those being infected and you coming back home and rubbing them again with a sanitizer. So that was before you step out. Now during the run. Mask, I've already stressed on it enough. On, off, continuously on, one of the two options. Never continuously off, because you definitely want it on the moment you see people. Physical distance, like I said, again, needs to be maintained. Watching your heart rate, keeping a tab on the intensity, very important, not just from the COVID point of view, as a routine as well, from cardiovascular safety and all other types of measures. So knowing your limits, same point, stressing again, know your limits. Please be mindful that, there would have been some detraining, even if you were doing everything possible at home. In the last 3 months, there would still be some aspect of detraining. Bin it right. If you're carrying any kind of glues with you, you're carrying any energy bars, whatever, make sure you're binning it right, not leaving it, not just from the environmental point of view, but even again from the COVID point of view, so that even the guy who's sweeping somewhere is not coming in direct contact with it. Finally, avoid barefoot running in case that's something that you were doing, because the droplets could be on the ground surface and they might stay there for some time. So avoid barefoot running. Sharing of items with a fellow buddy, even if it's somebody whom you know. Avoid sharing items as far as possible. Touching your own face, and that's why I said the mask comes in handy, because you'll just be careful of not touching your face, and avoid handshakes like I already mentioned in the beginning. Finally, when you're back home from a run, firstly, hand wash, sanitize, whatever's feasible. Taking off and, treating your clothes, shoes, mask appropriately, whether it's whichever way you're washing, etc. Again, washing your hands after you have touched your masks, clothes, shoes, everything. And then finally, sanitize anything else you were carrying along, like your mobile or any other, whether it's your watch or any other device. And with the mask thing, again, of course, everybody's read enough, but I would just like to stress again on this. It's about how you take out the mask, which is very important as well. So just make sure you're going through enough of the videos, etc., which are showing you on how to correctly take off the mask and how to correctly wash your hands, keeping in mind the 20-second rule, making sure you're washing at all the crevices of the inter-finger web spaces and all of those places. Finally, I'd like to end with saying that, if it's between performance, fitness, and health, Your health will probably take a little bit more priority just now. Fitness is equally important because, in fact, if you're fit, it helps, your health. That's how they found that people who had comorbidities were not doing well. So if you're fit, you have lesser comorbidities, it will help your health. But still, don't compromise your health just because you want to do that run. You have a plan, and you want to go and as per your running plan. So just give a little bit more preference to the health for now. That's me. Thank you once again for everyone who is here. Thank you, Mr. Venkat and Chris, for organizing this. And this is where you can reach out to me. Contact details. Thank you.
Thank you, Tvisha. Thank you very much. That was a very interesting presentation. Lots of new. We've done about 2 or 3 webinars on this, and Dr. Kumar Janardhanan, who's part of the audience, is there. We do an entire thing about mask with Dr. Contractor. But I tell in all webinars where we touch upon the COVID topic that this knowledge is correct as of 5th of July at about 6:30 p.m. to the best known effort, and this could change tomorrow morning. So don't hold it against us, okay? So everything is changing. Views are opinion. There are different levels of experts, and sometimes you don't even know whom to follow and whom not to follow, and that is a kind of situation. So thank you very much, Tvisha, and we'll take Dr. Christopher next, and welcome to the panel, Chris.
Hi, Venkat. Thanks for having me again. And thanks, Tvisha. That was really good. A lot of points, I think, as you mentioned, it's such a dynamic environment that we're living in at the moment with regards to information, and new stuff is coming out all the time. But there was a fair amount that I picked up there as well. So thank you very much for that. Okay, I'm going to share my screen. I think you should be able to see me. Can you see that okay?
Yes.
Okay. So
the floor is all yours, Doctor.
Okay, great. Lovely. So I will just be running through a couple of, I suppose, concepts and thoughts with regards to avoiding and managing injuries after the layoff. The whole COVID-19 environment has been pretty stressful, for most people. So returning to running after a long layoff is stressful in itself. It's generally quite tricky, but particularly considering everything else that's been going on, there's a lot of stresses and strains. And we know that with regards to injuries, there are a lot of other factors. It's not just falling over and hurting yourself. So stress can play a large part in that as well. Also just something to be mindful of. In India, obviously, we're quite heavily affected. I am in South Africa at the moment, but I'll be coming back shortly. And it's there's a lot of day-to-day stuff that I think we probably need to acknowledge, and not just ignore it and try and bang on like Tvisha mentioned, just like you were in February. I think we need to think a little bit more about what we're doing. From the evidence, we know that there's plenty enough evidence that exists to tell us that steep increases in training equals increased injuries, and this is across sports. It's not just running, but particularly in something very repetitive like a running type of exercise. So increases in those training loads or those spikes in loads are very frequently associated with an onset of injury. We want to try and reduce the magnitude of those spikes. Obviously, if you are going to try and get fitter, which is the goal of exercise, you do need more intensity. You do need more exercise, but we want to try and manage the size of that, the spike, the increase in the load. So we can mitigate this risk of loading by ensuring that we have a high base of training. So make sure that we have a high base of training achieved before we sort of push on into too intensive a block. So with that said, I just want to highlight a nice little graphic here that comes from the AIS, the Australian Institute of Sports. And so basically the graph on the right, you can see that the blue and yellow lines represent athletes respectively 2 weeks and 4 weeks of decreased training. or a break in training. The percentage across the bottom indicates how long that break was for. The intensity that they were training at, and the left-hand axis, the vertical axis, is how long were they training. That's how long they'll take to get back to normal training. The colors are the difference in amounts of time away from sport. So you can see that if an athlete trains at 60% of their normal volume and intensity for 2 weeks, which is not that abnormal, you might just have a busy 2 weeks with work or life or whatever, and you decrease your training to 60%, technically you should be taking around about 10 days to progressively return to full training. Okay, now 60% is a long way off, I'm sure, what most of us were able to achieve, certainly in Mumbai, with the laws around getting out and running. I mean, the society that I live in currently, you still can't run, actually. You're not allowed to run around the society. Forget about outside. And the area around us is just not safe to run in at the moment. So there's a fair amount to think about with regards to how long you should be sort of trying to build that ramp back to your full training load. Now, if we talk about injury prevention and avoidance, we would be silly not to talk about performance enhancement as well, because what we actually find is that the two go hand in hand. The things you do to enhance your performance are actually the same things you do to prevent injury, and vice versa. So, the best things you can do to enhance your performance, same things that you can do to prevent injury. So adequate strength in your lower body, managing your load adequately, correct planning of training, correct periodization. Leandi will go into this from the strength and conditioning point of view, and progression of your training. And then also, other add-ons like nutrition and sleep, and all of those things are all important. So having said that, we can talk about the support team. Now, if you're thinking of an international elite athlete, their support team, the numbers of support team or support staff rather can get into the double digits. But for your average one of us, anyone who just likes to, stick on your shoes and get out the door, as Venkat mentioned, there's a very low barrier to entry for running, which is probably the greatest part about running. But unfortunately as well, without the correct support and the right advice, we do run the risk of picking up injuries and doing things possibly incorrectly. So from our point of view, the access to these extra support staff, actually, it's increasing. It's becoming a much easier thing to do, to get hold of a good, sports medicine person to advise you on from the health point of view, let's say comorbidities, etc., like Tvisha mentioned, someone like myself or a physio who could help you with any kind of niggles that you have, and we'll go into some of the things you should be doing for niggles later. Leandi to help you with your, the sort of base of training around your running, because we all know now that running, just getting out and running isn't necessarily good enough. There's a lot more going on in our lives that we probably need to bulletproof ourselves a bit better by doing things like gym and strengthening, etc. We do know that moderate to high training loads are protective for injuries. So chronically, if you have a high or moderate to high training load, you're less likely to get injured. So I've just sort of mocked up two sort of 8-week training diaries here, for example. And you can see with this one, we progress at about 20% increase a week for the first 5 weeks, and then a little bit more over the next 3 weeks to get from 20 Ks to 60 Ks weekly mileage, which I would hope to think that everyone thinks is probably a little bit too aggressive. But injury studies have shown that anything, the 10% rule is not necessarily hard and fast. They have shown up to 22% increases weekly. Although that said, that hasn't gone over a long period of time. I think that was over a couple of weeks that they looked at that, and the injuries weren't significantly higher. I'm sure if you did that over months, you probably would see more injuries. But to be honest, the evidence there is not huge. It's hard to say exactly 10% or 15% or whatever. So we've got another graph there that probably looks a little bit more realistic, and this certainly should be a little bit more like what you're doing. Gradually ramping up, maybe between 10 and 15% a week, and then backing off after a couple of weeks, allowing your body to adapt, allowing you to regenerate and take that training and use it positively. So we know that moderate to high training loads are protective, but balance is the key. We have to back off every now and then if we're going to get where we want to get to. So load management is really the big thing, I think. Sorry, the big thing that we probably need to talk about more. And this will reference back to that original graph that I put up on the second slide, I think. Again, from the AIS here, Australian Institute of Sport. So you can see on the left-hand side there, the weeks of training at a reduced load. Okay, so if you've been away from training, let's say, look at the top left-hand side, the number 8. You've been away from training for 8 weeks. Now, if you've been doing 80% of your normal training load for 8 weeks, if we go to 80%, the extreme right column, then we would suggest that you spend 3.7 weeks. Obviously, you work that out into days, so just over 3.5 weeks. On ramping your training back up to what you would like it to be. Now, considering that you've been off for 8 weeks again already, that's 11, nearly 12 weeks that you would take to get back to your full training from the first week that you left, or the first day that you left. Considering the situation in Mumbai and across India, I mean, I haven't been able to run nearly even remotely what I would like to for probably 4 months, from mid-March, I would say, maybe even the beginning of March. So, if we're starting to talk about 8 weeks, at 80% being 3.5 weeks, let's go all the way back to the left-hand side there of 0%. That means that you literally need double the time, or exactly the same amount of time, rather. Overall, it would be double the amount of time you're away to get back. So that's suggesting for me, I'm probably need to take another 4 months to get back to where I would like to be. And I'm sure a lot of you are probably spitting out your tea listening to that. But unfortunately, this is the reality. And this data is based on tons of studies looking at the acute chronic workload ratio, which is a little bit controversial in itself. But it's probably, close to the best we have with regards to trying to predict injuries from a load management point of view. So again, if we just look at the text at the bottom of the graph there, another example, 2 weeks of reduced load at 40%. So some of us might have been able to do things in our societies, running around, etc. But I can't imagine anyone running reasonable distances prior to lockdown was able to do anything more than 20 to 40%, honestly. And doing sit-ups and crunches inside at home doesn't count. Under those circumstances, 2 weeks reduced load at 40%, you'd require 2.5 weeks of incremental training. So the total would be 4.5 weeks away. So it's really quite daunting to think of what's ahead of us. Now, what about the other factors? Tvisha also mentioned, that it's not just about COVID, not just keeping your hands clean, although that is most certainly the priority and why we're having the discussion. You still need to worry about your warm-ups, your normal cool downs, the things that you would ordinarily do, and your recovery. We know from, sorry, let me just go back there. We know from the research, obviously there's tons of stuff that's marketed to all of us, from compression clothing to this fancy massage gun and a vibrating ball that you sit on or lie on or whatever. I mean, there's tons of stuff going out there from a marketing point of view, advertised, as this recovery tool that's going to change your world. From an evidence point of view, from a science point of view, there are sort of a lot fewer things that actually really do matter. Ice baths do help you with perceived soreness and feeling like you have recovered, but from a performance point of view, they don't actually help. So it's not something that we would want people to do during training specifically, and also because it's actually been shown to possibly affect the adaptation. So if you do ice baths, you might not get the best adaptation from the workout you've just done. In competitions, again, runners are probably not going to have this issue, but in competitions for certain athletes where they have back-to-back, high performance expectations day to day, they might be able to, benefit from an ice bath or something like that. But again, going back to something that Tvisha mentioned, she mentioned sleep. And between nutrition and sleep, that's really about the best that we can do. Your average person on the street, train properly, manage your loads, make sure that you refuel properly. So what you put in is what you get out. The stupid old cliche of, you wouldn't drive your Ferrari down the road and have somebody put bootleg petrol in it. It's the same thing with your body. You don't want to be putting rubbish in your body as soon as you've trained, because your body's going to be trying its hardest to grab all the nutrients and all the help it can from whatever you've just put inside. So The reality is that in a 24-hour period, unless you're doing multiple training sessions a day, you're probably getting that out of a normal diet. But I would just say be wary of that, and it's probably worth consulting a nutritionist if you do have those concerns. But in a 24-hour period with a normal diet, making sure that you get enough sleep. This is the next thing: is the sleep. Anything under 7 hours is associated with increased injury risk, and that's across a broad population. Athletes probably need closer to 9, 10 hours a night. And then famously, Roger Federer came out a while ago and said that he tries to get 12 hours of sleep per day. I'm sure that includes napping, but I mean, that's quite alarming if we're thinking of, that's the extent that these guys are going to worry about their health and their recovery and performance. We should maybe be doing the same thing. Injury prevention exercises for running. Again, you'd want to be getting in touch with a professional based on exactly what it is that you are complaining with or complaining of, or something that maybe you have like a chronic issue that comes up quite regularly. But your standards here, if I can make it relatively black and white, is strength is everything. So make your legs stronger, make your calves stronger. Your soleus absorbs an enormous amount of force during a run. Your soleus is one of the muscles in your calf complex. So doing loads of calf raises, bent knee calf raises, your quads need to be strong, your glutes need to be strong. The whole triple extension mechanism, the ability to propel ourselves forward or jump is based on our ability to take advantage of a triple extension mechanism, as we call it. You're extending your ankles, you're extending your knees, and extending your hips. So opening ankles, opening knees, opening hips. And if you can't do that effectively, then something along that chain is going to end up breaking down or getting irritated. Typically for runners, what we see is Achilles issues or knee issues. So anterior or lateral knee pain would be the two sort of knee things, whether that's an ITB or a patella tendon or something, and then Achilles tendon. So those are the main areas, and really strengthening your lower legs, your calves, your quads, your glutes as much as possible, and then also a little bit of core stability. Those are very, very broad guidelines, of course, but like I said, get in touch with somebody who you're in contact with if you do have any specific injuries. And then that strength and conditioning, a lot of you might be asking, cool, well, that's all good and well, but how do I actually do it? Because the guidelines are all over the show, and you go to gym and you'll see people training in completely different ways. I don't want to say wrong ways. There's no real wrong way to train. I suppose there's dangerous ways to train, but and I know Leandi is going to go into this, but I'd just like to touch on the fact that there's, this myth that sort of pervades runners for years and years, and I suppose loads of other, endurance athletes like cyclists and swimmers as well. They're petrified of putting any muscle on or doing any strength in case they put on muscle. It takes a hell of a long to put on appreciable muscle bulk to change your weight. So, we're not suggesting you go to gym for 10 months pushing enormous weights. But going to gym and doing the right reps and set ranges is really, really important to prevent injuries and protect yourselves. So there's a repetition maximum continuum that was released by the National Strength and Conditioning Association. Effectively, if you look at this graph, you can see where you can train and where you can't train, and where you should train and where you shouldn't train. Now, if you're looking at hypertrophy that everyone's petrified about, that pretty much happens between, at the most 7 to 11 reps. But now, what do most lay people go to gym and they do 3 sets of 10, or they do 3 sets of 12? So that's probably why people are petrified of getting big. What we're looking more at is your strength. So we wouldn't want you necessarily to do that many reps. We'd want you to do way less reps. We want you to do, 3, 4, 5, 6 reps. And then the other concept that runners can't really get is they think, okay, well, if I'm going to go to gym, I should be doing more than 20 reps or more than 18 or 15 reps because I'm looking for endurance. But muscular endurance that you get in the gym by lifting weights is very different to the endurance that you get on the road. The endurance component for running is achieved on the road. You will not achieve that in the gym, so don't try. And then finally, I just wanted to move on to some niggles and basically what to do if you feel pain. Again, best advice here is to get hold of a medical professional that you are familiar with or you're in touch with if you do have something. But there are some basic guidelines that maybe could, keep you away from the hospitals, particularly currently under the COVID-19, environment. We don't really want to overload the medical system at all. If possible. So if we can keep you away from the hospitals for your own safety, for other people's safety, and to take the strain off the system, hopefully we can help you a little bit with that. As a guideline, any pain that hangs around longer than sort of 3 to 5 days, you probably need to investigate. It's quite normal to get pain after exercise. We all know that, and after training. Some pain, some discomfort. We don't want, horrible pain. Another good guideline is weight bearing. Are you able to tolerate weight on your limb? So specifically with the ankle and the foot, we've got a set of rules called the Ottawa foot and ankle rules. And if you can't walk 4 steps without being unable to take weight on that foot, then we would advise that you probably need an X-ray. That might be something. Again, acute traumatic injuries and chronic sort of overload injuries are quite different. Your chronic overload stuff is generally never an emergency. You probably don't need to race off to someone. I would much rather you get in touch with one of us over, the Geo Health Hub or WhatsApp or whatever, anyone that you're in touch with, to try and get some advice, and we might be able to walk you through 1 or 2 things. But if your pain doesn't settle within 3 to 5 days, I'd say it's probably worth investigating. Swelling as well that doesn't respond to rest and maybe icing is probably also something you should look at. And night pain, anything that's keeping you up at night is probably also worth investigating. I'm sure most of you have heard of rice, but there's a sort of more updated version that, again, is, there's some people are on the fence about the whole ice thing entirely. But from a holistic point of view, the police sort of approach seems better. So police stands for protection, the first one. Effectively, stop what you're doing, look after the area, don't stress it anymore unnecessarily, or don't endanger yourself anymore. Optimal loading versus rest. So that the R in the rice has been turned into optimal loading, the OL. And that would be more about the fact that if you can do it, you probably should do it. So we don't want people to do nothing, because then you get deconditioned, and that's also very bad for you. Ice, the I is for ice again, and then compression elevation are the same. That hasn't changed. And then things like scans. So do you need an X-ray? Do you need an MRI? Again, going back to the acute traumatic versus chronic overload, there's probably no emergency with a chronic overload type of thing. I would say get in touch with somebody get some advice on over the phone or over one of the consult apps or whatever. But for the foot and ankle, specifically, as I mentioned, the Ottawa foot and ankle rules, if you cannot walk, you cannot weight bear. In fact, with your knee as well, or your hip, if you can't weight bear, it's probably worth getting an X-ray or getting to a facility to see if somebody could have a look at you. And then the MRI is probably more relevant for an acute traumatic sort of twist of a knee maybe, and again that swelling that isn't responding, you can't weight bear, etc. So those would be my basics for niggles, and that's about it. I think hopefully I've covered a few of the questions you guys have with regards to getting back to running. Like I mentioned in the beginning, the load management is probably the most important thing that we all need to think about right now. We can't just put on our shoes and pretend it's February again. You really do need to factor in, and there's an equation that you can use. It's not guesswork. There's an equation that we can put into, how many months were you away, or how many weeks rather were you away, what percentage were you doing, and then we can sort of factor that in. So if you know those 2 things, you can get a decent idea of how you should be able to safely, of course there are no guarantees, but how you should be able to safely return to running without too many issues. Yeah, that's it. I hope that's been helpful.
Thank you, Dr. Chris. Amazing presentation, and some of those figures I was trying to see them myself, and I needed to really. And there's a wealth of information in at least 2 of those charts that you presented, 2 or 3 of those charts that you presented to us,
Sure.
And some of the viewers have said that they couldn't see the figures well, etc.
I'll put them. What I'll do is I'll put them. Yeah, I can share them on Twitter or Instagram or whatever. Maybe I'll use the YouTooCanRun hashtag or something.
Correct. What we do is that after the show is over, we do show notes, we kind of break down. We put external links, we put all the references, we put the biodata to all of you. Wherever studies are there, we put external links of the studies, and we put all the show notes. So we can put links to the presentation there. So everybody who sees the videos can also download the presentation. It takes about half a day for our team to do that. But you also put timestamps, which is if you want to hear Chris, then you can go to this time. So it's like chapter and index in a book. So you don't have to like go through the whole thing and wade your way through the whole. So that's what we'll do. And yes, we will put the presentation, put it in the show notes, so everybody will get to see the tremendous amount of depth of knowledge that both you and Tvisha shared previously. Okay, so with those few words, we'll keep all the questions together. I myself have a bunch of questions to ask from my presentations. Yes, but yes, we will put all the questions together, and now we'll get in Leandi, and we will have her tell us how to take care of the strengthening and conditioning part before you're back on the road.
Right.
The panel, Leandi. Welcome. And Dr.
Okay.
Pedra, I'll take you off the panel. There you go, Leandi.
Okay. All right. So, hi everyone. Like it was discussed earlier, my name is Leandi Van Zyl. I'm a sports scientist and strength and conditioning coach. So when I started this presentation, I wanted to put after the lockdown, but in Mumbai, we are just going into another lockdown. So I thought I'd just say during and after the lockdown. And since all the gyms are shut, I consider it still as lockdown. All right. So firstly, what I would like to discuss today is the importance of strength and conditioning, and then some common misconceptions with strength training for runners. I think Chris also touched on this. Then what does the research say about strength training for runners specifically? And then I would go into detail about what the challenges are currently with the COVID situation and the gyms not being open and all of that. And then how did the lockdown affect your body, right? Because our bodies have changed quite a lot since the lockdown has started. It's been months now for most of us. And then how to monitor your training. You guys have heard a lot about this from Tvisha and from Chris. So this is a really important aspect for me, and I'll kind of just guide you guys through it, and I'm happy to answer some questions at the end. And then lastly, how do you do strength training at home? And then we'll just go into a little bit of detail there. All right, so firstly, why do we do strength and conditioning for runners? Firstly, the most important part is it improves our performance, right? So we want to be able to run the same distance in less amount of time. So it improves our performance and it reduces our incidence for injuries. So strength training is really important for any sport, but specifically for runners. So what are the misconceptions? The first one Chris rightly pointed out is that a lot of runners feel like strength training makes you slow and heavy. This is not true. If you're training for hypertrophy, like Chris also mentioned, the rep ranges and the sets will be completely different to strength. So strength, we bring the repetitions down and we work with a little bit heavier weight. So this is really important because it's a big difference in what you're actually training. And we'll see later on how strength training will improve your performance when you're running as well. All right, and then another myth is being a runner, I don't need to do any other training. Okay, again, if we look at the benefits of strength training, we want to improve our performance and we want to reduce the incidence of injuries. So strength training will really help you with that. So I hope that if you guys take anything from this presentation, is that strength training is really important. All right, and then the last thing is that you can only do strength training in a gym. I'll show you guys some exercises at the end. And like you can see in the picture, this lady has a bucket and she put books in it for a weight. So there's a lot of creative ways where you can weight yourself to do strength training at home. All right, so now what does the research say? So this was a study where they looked at key performance indicators for distance runners. And the two major ones that was affected by strength training for 40 weeks was running economy and the velocity of maximal oxygen uptake. Basically, running economy means if your running economy improves, you're using less energy and you're more efficient when you're running, right? And if we look at velocity of maximal oxygen uptake, is that the speed, say for example, there's someone and you want to overtake them and you increase your speed a little bit, or towards the end of the race where you're sprinting towards the finish line. So very anaerobic, performance indicator. So basically the study, what makes it really interesting is they also took the circumference and the skin folds of these elite runners, and it showed that after 40 weeks of strength training, they improved their maximum strength and their reactive strength, which is basically your power, and it improved their running economy and velocity at maximal oxygen uptake, but without bulking up too much. So they took skin folds and they could see that it didn't affect their muscle size as much as it's believed for a lot of runners. This was a really nice study just to basically show that. And then this is all great, but we all know that currently we're stuck in this pandemic, and there's a lot of challenges that we all face daily and that you face specifically as a runner. So like Tvisha also mentioned, and Chris, you've not run outside as much. So again, overtraining can happen now if you go outside and you start running like you did before the pandemic. So that could lead to injury. You have to social distance. We all know that there's a lot of running clubs and it's a very social thing and it keeps you motivated. And if that's not there and you have to social distance from some of your teammates, it's really hard to actually stay motivated. Running with a mask, Tvisha touched on this a lot. So again, that's a challenge. Gyms aren't open, so where do we do strength training? And then all of this will impact your motivation as well to do any running or any training for that matter. So it's really important that we consider this when we look at the other things in this presentation. All right, so now with the lockdown, it has really affected our body. Since we're not allowed to go outside or to go to our works and just be active, it has really affected our posture when we work from home. So a few things that has happened to our bodies while we're working from home. So firstly, the forward head position, all right? This will usually affect your neck and your upper back and get tension. You can get headaches. It's a really bad position. And then what happens is if you go running now, you'll want to tend to be in that position as well because of the negative effects of sitting for so long. All right, because of our slouch position, our chest muscles will get really tight. And again, this will affect our upper back muscles, will get weak and lengthened. It will also restrict our thoracic mobility. Then our posterior pelvic tilt, ideally we would want a neutral pelvis when we're sitting. But from all the sitting and slouching, we tend to get more of a posterior pelvic tilt, and then that affects our hip flexors. So just a lot of things that happen to our body when we're sitting for so long and when we're working from home and when we're not as active as we used to be. And all these things need to be taken into consideration when we're looking at our strength program and when we're looking at our running program, because these can negatively affect our running. All right, so now if we're going to look at load monitoring, so everyone spoke a lot about this. So I'm going to take you guys step by step. Firstly, what is load monitoring, if you haven't heard of it before, and then how to plan accordingly, how to progressively plan yourself to get back to running. All right, so firstly, what is load? So it's any physiological work performed by an athlete, so in competition and during training, and the stress that it places on your body. All right, so we have two types of loads. We have internal load and we have external load. So internal load is our physiological and psychological, it's the psychological and physiological aspect of load. So basically it's our heart rate, it's the blood lactate they take, it's the VO2 max, like you guys can see in the picture. So this is internally what is happening to your body. Then Tvisha also spoke about the rating of perceived exertion. So this is basically a scale that you can use to say how hard is your workout. So for example, 1 would be very easy, like a stretch, and 10 would be maybe a competition for you. So this is a nice scale to use in order to plan your programming. Then if we look at external load, so this is objective measures of work. So a lot of the things on your smartwatches, like distance, the GPS, speed, power output, and then your training frequency, all of these things, that's externally. All right, so now how do we calculate the load? So if we look at strength and conditioning, usually what we do is we multiply the reps by the sets by the load. Okay. Now we know that's very difficult currently because you don't know how much your bag of books weigh, and ideally this is what you should do. But if you can't do that, then you can also measure it internally by taking the rating of perceived exertion. Saying, oh, you did a session today, okay, it was a 7 out of 10, and you document that, and that we'll see later how it comes in handy, just to see how to monitor yourself over a period of time. All right, then if we look at running, so like Chris mentioned about the how many weeks have you not been training at optimally. So there's a lot of calculations like that we can do. But for now, what you can start doing where you are currently is you can jot down your mileage. So jotting down your mileage, you can see over time how it progresses and where it might spike and where it might cause injuries. And then for internally, you can use session rating of perceived exertion. Now this is basically your RPE, like we spoke about, rating of perceived exertion, 1 to 10, multiply by your session duration. Okay. So basically, if I can go to the next slide, you guys can see. So basically, 60 minutes multiply 7 gives you 420. Okay, so this is your session rating of perceived exertion. All right. You guys will see this graph pretty much is exactly what Chris was showing. But what's important here is to notice that it progressively increases and then it decreases, right? So this 4th week is usually called our deload week, okay? This doesn't always happen in elite sports especially, but if you can control your training, try and make that 4th week, when you've built up, a deload week, where it's about 40 to 60% less than your 3rd maximal week. All right. But now, one thing I also want you guys to notice is this average line, this yellow line or orange line. I don't know if you guys can see it, but this is basically the average load, the average chronic load. Okay, I'll discuss this in the next slide. So if we look at acute and chronic workload ratio, okay, sounds pretty fancy. Acute basically just means 1 week, the average of 1 week, and chronic means over 3 to 6 weeks, depending on the athlete, depending on the sport. So what we want to do is you want to take your acute workload, divide it by your chronic, and you'll get a ratio. Now that ratio is very important because it will show you if you're under training or overtraining. Okay, so if we look at this green sweet spot, this is where the decrease in injury is. Okay, so ideally that ratio should be between 0.8 to 1.3. That's the sweet spot. That's where you're actually working and you're progressing, but you're not overloading your body and you're not underloading your body. All right, because again, underloading your body is also not a good thing. Okay, so this is kind of the sweet spot. So if you start writing down and calculating your load right now, you can progressively increase it and track it over time, say 4 weeks, say 6 weeks, and you can see if it's progressive or if there's spikes, because I can guarantee you if there's spikes, it will predispose you to some injury, all right? And even if it spikes, then you can see, oh, my load might spike this week. Maybe I should tone it down. Maybe I should foam roll a little bit more. Maybe I should sleep a little bit more. It's a good indicator for you to see how your workload progresses over a period of time. All right, so now that we've spoken about load, I want to go into detail into strength training. All right, so any strength training program starts with a warm-up and ends with a cool-down. Very, very important. Like for your running, it's the same thing. Strength training has to start with a warm-up and a cool-down. Okay, if we look at warm-up, we think of stability exercises, mobility exercises, activation, dynamic stretches. All of these things plays a really important part in getting you ready for your session. Okay, then there's a few exercises which is easy to remember so that you know you have an overall program. Okay, so knee dominant exercises first of all. So the movement starts from the knee. We'll go into this a little bit in detail later on as well. So knee dominant movement starts from your knee, squats, lunges, step up, anything like that. All right, hip dominant is your deadlifts, your hip thrusts, Romanian deadlift, all of those exercises. Okay, now I'm going to talk about the upper body exercises, right? Because we also sometimes runners believe that they don't have to do any upper body exercises. It's really important that you do upper body exercises because as many times as your legs moving when you're running, so many times your arms are also moving, right? And if it's not in an efficient way, it can actually cost energy, right? So it's really important that you do strengthen your upper body, and I'll show you guys how. So basically, push would be either vertical or horizontal. So something like a push-up or a standing shoulder press, for example. Pull-up or pull exercises, again, vertical and horizontal. Seated rows, we can do pull-ups, anything like that. Okay, single leg, very, very important for runners. Ideally, running is a single leg exercise, so strengthening your single leg is very important, especially for your stability and again to prevent those injuries. All right, and then plyometrics. So this is actually Chris spoke about this as well. So it's a triple extension, ankle, knee, hip. It's really important, like you guys could see with one of my first slides, because it really improves your running. It makes you shock absorb better. It makes your joints able to handle all that stress. And I'll touch on this as well in the next slide. But it's really important that you progress this properly as well, because I think a lot of people think, oh great, I should jump in my program, and they just go and do a bunch of jumps, and the next day your knee hurts, right? So it's really important that you do it properly. First of all, your technique is proper, and then secondly, that again you progress it over time. Very important. All right, then Chris spoke about core as well. So bracing, rotation, anti-rotation, really important. And then cool down. Again, if you don't have ice pots and you don't have a foam roller, stretching will do as well. And make sure that you hold it for at least 20 to 30 seconds. All right, so a holistic program will include all of these factors. Okay, so now if we look at plyometrics, what's really important here is if you're going to be doing this in your house, make sure that you're wearing trainers. Okay, all our floors, especially in Mumbai, I don't know about other places, is concrete. It's a lot of knock on your knee. So make sure you're wearing your trainers. Make sure that you do it properly. Ankle, knee, hip alignment needs to be perfect. Otherwise, it will cause more problems. If you're not sure about the technique, rather don't do it, to be honest. Or do it in front of a mirror. But make sure that your technique is proper before doing any plyometric exercises. And then how do you progress it? Well, again, probably 10% rule is good. So if I'm doing 5 this week, maybe I'll do 6 or 7 next week. If I do 6 or 7 the week after that, maybe I do 10. Gradually increase the number of jumps. Just don't go now and do hundreds of jumps. Gradually progress the jumps and make sure the technique's proper. Very, very important. Again, here we can also do broad jumps. You can do single leg jumps. But please be sure that you know what technique you should use and use your shoes. All right, then if we look at knee dominant exercises, Again, like I said, okay, single leg squat comes under single leg as well. Important, knee, ankle, hip alignment. Make sure that you do the exercise nice and slow. Make sure that your back stays nice and straight. A lot of people squat like this with their back, then hip flexors are usually tight. Make sure that you stay nice and straight. And again, proper technique, very important. And you guys can do these exercises at home. There's nothing wrong with doing these at home. You can use 2 water bottles. You can use a heavy backpack if you want to. You can even buy 2 of those big jugs of 5-liter water bottles that you can do it with. Again, slowly progress it. That's what's really important. All right. Then we get to hip dominant. A lot of people don't like doing hip dominant exercises because of technique, and then they get injured and they feel their back. It's really important that with these exercises, you should not feel your back. You should feel your glutes and your hamstrings. And make sure that your back's nice and flat when you're lifting up. And the movement comes from your hips and not from your knee. And again, we want to balance, right? We don't just want to do only squats, because then our anterior chain gets really dominant. And that can cause, again, other effects on our running. So we want to do, for every knee dominant exercise, you do a hip dominant. Keep it nice and balanced. Okay, and then hip thrusts as well. Again, make sure you have neutral pelvis for that. Okay, then if we look at our upper body pull exercises, these are easy ones you can do at home. Bent over row, 3-point dumbbell row, really important exercises for your upper back. And especially now that we've all been sitting at home and you're slouching a little bit, just to get that extension through your back, really important exercises. And again, we don't just want to do push-ups all the time. I see a lot of home programs only doing pushing exercises. Be sure to also do some pulling exercises. Every push needs a pull exercise, very important. All right, then we have push, which is our shoulder press, and like I said, push-ups. But make sure that you don't do too many push-ups right now, because it might, again, make those chest muscles really tight. All right, then we have some core exercises here that you can do. I know if you don't have a band, it's really fine. You can do this with the dumbbell as well, or with the water bottle. And just really getting creative with any of the exercises that you're doing. But make sure you do them so that when you transition back into running, you're ready. Okay, so how do we progress now? Because everyone's been on home programs for the last 4 months. So I know that I also feel this, that I don't know what to do with myself anymore. But there's easy ways of increasing the intensity of these exercises and increasing your overall then program as well. So firstly, by increasing the frequency. So if you're used to just doing 3 sessions a week, maybe try and do 4 sessions a week. Increasing the sessions can really just help you out and just make it a little bit more intense and keep the load on the body. Then increase in volume. So if we talk about the volume, we talk about sets, we talk about reps, we talk about load. I know everyone does not have load right now, probably, but like I said, use creative ways, use some books, use a bucket, use water bottles, use 5-liter water bottles. So there is still ways that you can load it, and then maybe once that load becomes comfortable and you're like, what do I do now? Maybe then you can increase the reps a little bit. All right, we're not talking about 20 reps, we're just talking about 8 to 10 reps. Okay. Again, if we look at sets as well, so if 3 sets starts getting easy, do 4 sets, do 5 sets, but again, progressively. Okay, and then if we look at increase in intensity, so this would usually happen when we increase our load, but currently that I know that's challenging. So what I like to do is I like to do some circuits. So Tabata basically is 20 seconds on, 10 seconds off. Just a nice intense circuit. You put out all your equipment. You do about 8 exercises. You can do 12 exercises. You can do 15 exercises. But if you're not used to it, please start with 8 exercises because it is quite intense. In between the sets, you can maybe take rest about 3 to 5 minutes and then go at it again. Nice high intensity, gets the heart rate up. EMOM is basically every minute on the minute. So choose 5 exercises, choose some goal repetitions for each exercise, try and finish it in a minute, and then the rest of the minute that you're not exercising, you can rest. And it's just, again, just a high intensity way of just getting creative. And then a pyramid is basically, again, choosing a few exercises, and you're going to just basically gradually build on each of the exercises. So yeah, these are a few ways of just progressing your program right now at home. Hopefully the gyms will open up soon, but there are a lot of creative ways that you can do all of this at home. All right, so basically that's it for me, guys. This is my contact details if you have any questions. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Leandi. Fantastic presentation, and I had a question about ATL, CTL, and you covered it so well. So let me get the others in, and then we'll do we'll take all the questions in. Okay. Welcome back, Chris. Welcome back, Tvisha. Thank you. We kept in the cold. As I was listening to each one of your presentations, I felt that we have taken 3 webinars and put them into one. Each one of you is such a depth of knowledge that we could have done a complete hour with just one presentation. But we'll try to go through the questions. We'll try to do as much justice as we can, and maybe later on sometime we can do a deep dive into each one of those topics separately on a separate occasion, separate day. There are questions, but let me bunch those questions and ask them, okay? And not in any order of priority. The first question is about the mask, and everybody is concerned about it. The one question that comes up is, does carbon dioxide kind of accumulate within the mask, and therefore, are you not getting the oxygen that you should be getting, and are you breathing back your own carbon dioxide? Is one question. The other question, which is within the realm of what Tvisha covered, is that how much distance should you keep? Because there has been this study that said cyclists should have 20 meters behind because it's a long plume of aerosols and all that. So what's the latest on that? Mask and how much distance between runners or cyclists?
Yeah, so I'll cover the distance part first. So like I said that 6 feet is the minimum which should be there. Like you mentioned about the 15, I've not read 15 meters anywhere, but I've read 4 to 5 meters, which basically becomes like 15 feet. So that's what they call slipstream, because when the runner exhales, but because the runner at the back of him could be reaching him within a few seconds. So if you only maintain 6 feet, then that's a very short time. And that's the reason some studies have suggested 15 feet. But then there were some reports negating this again. So like I said, the safest is to try and keep as much distance as possible, a bare minimum of 6 feet. But if it is 6 feet, definitely put on the mask for an extra precaution. If there is a way that we can do 15 feet, then that's brilliant. Yeah, that's brilliant. So one way of combating that thing is, because this happens when you run one behind the other, is you run side by side. So that way, then, you're not running behind somebody else's air. And so side by side, of course, you still maintain 6 feet and you're doing side by side. So those are the two. Like I said, I understand there's not an exact answer to this. So the best is, like I said, choose a place which is less crowded. Just that's the safest way. Rather than falling into this, and choose a time. Now you cannot be fixated anymore that I'm a runner, I have to exercise and run at 6 in the morning. Luckily, because your office is under a semi work from home situation, take advantage of that and go at odd hours. So that's what I would suggest. Coming to the mask thing, that's the reason, because there is some element of carbon dioxide retention. That's the reason you have those masks with the respirator. You must have seen those with the little opening, the valve thing. But that valve thing doesn't protect it. It's harmful for the others because you're expiring out the bad stuff. So then, so that's it. That's the reason it's not recommended. And we should just wear the regular mask and probably avoid the respirator one. There would be some element of carbon, very, very some element, depending on how, and that's the reason we don't recommend the N95, because that's very tight, and that's the reason we've come down to the middle ground, which is the surgical mask. So I think I explained that. So that's why we can't do cloth is the best because it allows very little retention, but it's not going to be fully protective and it will soak up when you're a runner. N95 will soak up too much and it will definitely cause trouble. Even in regular walking, it can be troublesome. So that's the reason we come to the middle path of surgical masks. So like I said, the debate is between health and choosing your health with the COVID situation and choosing running between your fitness. So if you feel you cannot find a situation where you cannot run without a crowd, you're finding running with a mask risky, you're not mentally comfortable, I would say pick your health in that case. Stick to your home routine, home routine stuff. Try getting in. There were people who were doing running in the house, so try doing something like that if you're worried. But mask is still, you should still wear it if you're in a crowd. Yeah, and more than 6 feet is recommended.
Let me share something, and I wanted to do something. I ran about 10 kilometers with the N95, and I couldn't run. It was kind of suffocating. I ran about 5 kilometers with a cloth mask, just cloth and some this. And the cloth, when it becomes wet, it kind of muffles your nose and your lips, and you get a smothering feeling, which is very uncomfortable. So you just can't run with it. Okay, but I found that I ran my 21K. I did the comrades, there are 2 South Africans here. So I did the virtual comrades run of 21K, and I ran it with the surgical mask. And the surgical mask did allow me to respirate, inhale, exhale quite easily. And I didn't have to remove the mask when I'm running. So that's my own. I mean, it's a study of one, but that's important for me. So if I'm going to go running, I'm going to wear a surgical mask and run. Of course, now there are all these sports masks that have come out. Adidas has come out with one. Under Armour has come out with another one. And there are variations and people are working on it. And innovation is something brilliant, and I'm sure that we'll get this problem solved, and we'll soon have a branded product, and we'll have a webinar between the Adidas mask and the Under Armour mask at some point of time. Okay, thank you very much. Chris, your presentation was superb. One of the things that you said in the presentation was that in about 6 weeks there is about 60% of detraining that happens. I had thought that the rule was about 5% detraining per week, and one might debate about whether how much you get detrained, what is the chronic load before you started retraining, all that can be the thing. But really, I mean, today if you take average Bombay or average Indian or average citizen of the world, it's been about 100 days since the lockdown. Depending again upon which part of the world you're in, and you came into lockdown, you came out of lockdown, and you went back in, and all that. So over 100 days, I would say that the detraining is possibly to the extent of 80%. So you're almost as if you're a new runner in many ways. What is your take on
that? Well, first I would say I don't think I said that you lose 60% of your training. The percentages on the chart, and again, maybe this is probably another good reason to share the chart properly, but the percentages on the chart was more with respect to how much training you were able to do. So how much of your expected training, let's say your expected training is a fictional 100%, then what were you training at? What level were you training at? Were you training at 60% of your expected for that period? And knowing that, we can then work out, or we can give you an idea of how long it should take you to get back to your expected 100%. Because if you've been training at 60% for, let's say, 4 weeks, you probably need to factor in an extra around about 3 weeks. Like I said, there is an equation that we use that's come out of the Australian Institute for Sport, and again, there are no guarantees, but it's probably about the best option we have to be able to guide people with regards to how long they take to get back, to accumulate back to their expected training loads.
Let's talk of a hypothetical runner in India. 100 days, observed the pandemic lockdown instructions to the book, didn't go out of his house, and indoor running doesn't count. And we did an entire webinar between indoor fractional running and continuous running. in the indoor strength training is fine. I mean, you can keep your conditioning, strength, some aerobics internal, maybe cycling, maybe some spot running, so maybe some hit workout, whatever. Okay, so now you can run within 2 kilometers. Okay, so we are going by what is the current rule in Bombay. So where would that runner be as a percentage of, let's say, his peak was in March, because most running in India happens during the winter months, and it kind of you build up to January, then February, and then March, and then the lockdown hit. So you were at a peak of training when the lockdown hit, and now 100 days, practically nothing except for a little bit here and there. So what percentage of detraining would have happened now?
If that's directed at me, I would say a hell of a lot. Hard to put an absolute number on it, but I mean, yeah, that's a huge amount of detraining for effectively close to 100 days, so 3.5 months, let's call it, or just shy of 3.5 months. Yeah, depending on, look, I don't think, certainly not from the patients that I've seen, nobody's been sitting around doing nothing. Everyone has been trying to do something, and I've actually, in fact, seen a lot of patients who've come to see me because they were running inside their house, and they were trying to run 11 Ks in their corridor or something silly like that. I mean, I say silly, people are desperate. If you're a runner, you get desperate. But the fact is that it's not advisable to change direction every 5 meters for 11 Ks. That's going to give you bigger problems than you had when you started. So I would suggest that most people didn't do nothing. So if you work off a fictional, say 40%, like I suggested in the talk, if somebody's been working at 40% of their optimal training, you're looking at roughly another 2.5 months, so pretty much doubling it.
Yeah, and
to try and get back to where they want to go.
Yeah, and just to add to that as well, like I said, you have to start monitoring yourself and progress from
absolutely.
there. You can't just go, oh, I'm now 40% from February. Don't do that. Start where you are now. Like you were saying, you did a 5K in this mosque. Great. What was your RPE? How long did it take you? And you start progressing from there. You can't go on previous stuff, unfortunately. I think just starting to monitor yourself from now, from when you're running, is a good idea, and then slightly progressing from there.
So that throws up a very interesting question. How do you measure the amount of detraining that has happened? On what metric? Is the VO2 max a barometer to go by? Single number that can give you a percentage, and from there you can build a plan. So how would you determine how much you got detrained? Detraining is from an aerobic perspective, from a strength and training, conditioning perspective. So how do you determine that?
That's a good question. I think, again, in the situation that we are, it would be nice to take everyone for VO2 max test, but that's quite hard to do right now. What I like to do is, and it's probably not going to be accurate right now because you didn't do it before the lockdown, but I like to do a 5-minute mass test. Basically, 5 minutes, you run as far as you can, you document that distance. That gives you a basic idea of your meters per second for whatever distance you covered, right? And then what you can do is you can then start progressively planning from there. Again, you can't relate it to before the lockdown because you probably didn't do it before the lockdown. But I think for me, that's just a nice test that's easy, that's repeatable, that you can say, okay, I'm running this right now, and I can progress from there. For detraining in general, I think, you'll just have to get outside and do a test to see how much of it has happened. Like I say, the mass is for me the easiest one. I don't know, Chris, if you have any other tests that you think would show detraining.
No, I think it's very tempting to try and do all of these things on our own as athletes. But one of the things that I made reference to in my presentation is how easily accessible good quality professionals are nowadays. 20 years ago, then you needed to be an elite athlete to have a decent support team. Now, it's really, really easy for patients to actually just pick up the phone, book an appointment on an app, and you can be dealing with somebody that afternoon who can give you, very specific advice. I think a lot of these talks are good to give people broad information, but if you're a runner trying to solve all your problems here, then I think you're probably going about it the wrong way. Get in touch with somebody who can give you some very specific advice based on your specific environment and your specific history. That's going to be much more beneficial. You're going to spend a lot less effort and money in the long run if you do things properly, from the start.
I agree. We talked about running within the house and making twists and turns, and we have Radha Krishnaswamy on the audience with us, and she's an excellent strength and training conditioning coach. She's been the strength and conditioning coach for the Indian women's cricket team that won all those matches, and she brought out very, very nicely that this fractional learning and this turning around is just going to mess up your gait and going to change the entire running economy. And it's, I mean, the Garmin shows something, but actually it's not that's not what the physiological benefit of that running is. I don't know if this is something that we can hold water, but let's say that I have a run of March. Let's say I did hypothetically a 10K run of March when I was in my peak. I went for a training one day. I did a tempo paced run, 10K or a 5K, and I take a 5K segment out of that, and I say that okay, in that on that day in March before the lockdown, when I was at my peak, I did this 5K in so much time, and this was my heart rate. So today, what does it take? So therefore, can there be some kind of a comparison? Would that comparison be valid? I'm just trying to make it practical for the average runner.
Yeah.
Okay, I'm trying to
sure.
Yeah.
I think there's definitely a valid comparison to be made there. The comparison would be that your heart rate would be way more, a fair percentage higher now for the same, effort. Your RPE would be much higher for the same effort, or when I say effort, the actual exercise effort, the distance, the time or whatever. But what you do with that information then as a runner now and how you let that guide you, I think is beyond the point. You're not going to be able to do anything with that. Like I mentioned, I think the planning and the periodization of how to go where, you can't do that on your own really for too long, particularly bearing in mind where we've come from. Yes, you can. Of course you can. But the likelihood of you picking up injuries and not performing as well as you want to is really why we're having this discussion, right? So of course you can, but yeah, I mean, you're just shooting in the dark, really.
Yeah, so just again, starting to monitor yourself now, maybe doing a 5K, seeing what your RP is, seeing what your heart rate is, and then seeing what it was then, but kind of saying, that's okay, I'm probably not going to run like that right now. Let me progress. Let me do a 6K. Let me do other things, and let's just kind of monitoring it from now on.
Yeah, that's a good way to go. Tvisha, we have Dr. Kumar Janardhanan from Chennai, very good endocrinologist, and we had a webinar with him. And there was this thing about going for a run and coming back, and based on the presentation that you did, you said all the things about cleaning stuff and coming back, and all that is valid, and I think everybody should do that. Today my wife went to the parlor after the entire lockdown period, and we kind of sprayed her down as she came back. We're being paranoid, but I don't know. I think it helps to be paranoid at this time. So there was this discussion that happened, that when you're running now, and generally there is an increased viral load in the environment, in the society, because everybody's coming out. There's a lot of herd community, social spreading is happening, and people are running. People are exhaling. Some are not wearing the mask that they should be wearing. So generally the load in the atmosphere is higher, and you got wet clothes, and we know that this kind of transmits through aerosols and through wet drops. So the probability, it was felt, of you coming back with something contaminating on your wet t-shirt because it's sweaty and this is much higher, though you might have worn a mask and done everything correct. So one of the things that was suggested was that you just go straight into the bathroom, strip off your clothes, have a shower, and then step out, and don't go anywhere else. So what are your thoughts on that? That kind of solution that emerged in that webinar.
I would say that's not just for running. It's for even when you're going out for grocery shopping. It's for everything. We've been doing it for the last, we've been advising that for the last 4 months, ever since the lockdown. If you've gone out and come back, definitely change your clothes. You don't sit with the same clothes on your couch, on your chair. So it's the same thing, just the way you would ask to sanitize your phone, you definitely, depending on how much exposure there was, say for example, if you're coming back from a run, I would definitely take a shower. If somebody's coming back from any place where they've been more than 15-20 minutes, I think the general government guidelines and not government guidelines, but what the panel of doctors is recommending is definitely coming back and taking a shower. If not taking a shower, at least completely cleaning up your exposed body surfaces and putting your clothes either for a wash or hanging them somewhere to leave them for drying for about 48 hours and using them only after 40. So that's been the general guideline. So when you said that your wife came back from the salon today and you sprayed her down, I have said that she should have actually just gone for a shower. There was no doubt about it. And I wouldn't say that's paranoia. That's something that has been fairly recommended. We've been doing it. We've been doing it pretty much regularly. Clothes, you don't sit with the same clothes. Yes, for sure. So I don't see. So when I mentioned in my last checklist slide also, when you come back home, first just wash your hands. Then you take off your clothes and take off your mask and everything. Dispose it off properly or put the clothes in the washing. Put them for washing, whatever. Then re-wash your hands, and then you still again do go for a shower. Yeah, maybe I skipped that part. I kind of assumed it was being done, but no, you definitely still go for a shower. If anything, washing face, at least washing your exposed arm surfaces and all, which are going to come in contact. Because if I'm going to sit on a table like this, after coming back, my arms are still touching the table. And after some time, say there's a kid in the house, he's going to come and touch this table surface. So 100%. The bath is the safest way out. If you are lazy and you want to skip a shower, at least some washing recommended.
Yeah, we sprayed her, and then she went for a bath, of course, which is a practice that we have been following.
I'm trying to say that we don't know enough. Maybe 1 year later we will say that this is paranoia, but at this point, just do it because we don't know. So 1 year later we might say that, oh, that was so stupid and funny of us, but just now, better to be safe than sorry. That's the situation, I think.
I agree with you. I definitely agree with you. Better safe than sorry. I definitely agree. And the risk is so high of getting contaminated, and we know how the medical situation is. You guys are in the forefront of that battle, and it can be so difficult if things go wrong because one doesn't even know where to go and what to do. There is so much of information and there's so much of misinformation, and it can be a really difficult thing. So coming back, let's before we go to the question, let's take and I'm going to ask this to all the three. Hypothetical runner in India, didn't run for 100 days, did some strength training, put some books in a bucket and lifted them, or took those 5-liter jug cans and did something in his house, maybe went up and down the staircase, just a little bit here and there, and is now starting to run. Okay, so he can come out here. He knows that he has to come back and have a bath. He knows he can wear a surgical mask. He knows he needs to look at his ATL, CTL and try to this. So what is the best case scenario for him to train from, say, now, July, let's say that from August, and till say January, say Mumbai Marathon. Okay, if it gets done in January. So what would you advise him? What would be your training plan? How would you tell him to approach his entire training protocol. So Tvisha, first to you.
Yeah, so I'm assuming this gentleman doesn't have, like I said, the first thing as a doctor I would look at is assuming the person is generally fit and doesn't have any comorbidities. Because if the person has any comorbidities, I would definitely recommend a consult and do this in person and actually figure out what the comorbidity is, whether it's a diabetes. That comorbidity could also be something like a knee osteoarthritis or a past knee injury. With comorbidities, I just don't mean any cardiovascular thing, but even if they've had an injury in the past. But of course, from the initially, it will be the cardiovascular point of view that I would be concerned about. And the person needs to actually, I think Chris and Leandi will address this, but jotting down and actually noting what they have done at least in the last 4 weeks. I wouldn't go as far back as what's happened 2 months back, but at least what has happened over the last 4 weeks, if they can jot it down and then take it from there. And I think medically, we just want to look at comorbidity currently, and that they've not suffered any COVID infection. If they have suffered any COVID infection, then obviously the X-ray, CT scans need to be looked at. The oxidation saturation today needs to be looked at, and all of those things. But otherwise, medically, I think it's fine. It's the training plan which is of most importance. So over to Chris and Leandi.
Chris, before you take on, I want to add one more twist to the question. Okay, the twist is this, that because this guy has been working from home, and we all know how working from home is. It's about 14 hours in front of a computer, if not more. And so therefore, there's a lot of detraining, posture alignment, strength, conditioning, leading to a lot of tracking errors, which can result in injuries. That triple leg extension doesn't happen properly. You can't do box jumps, and all that is gone for a toss. So bearing that in mind, what would you advise this hypothetical runner who comes to you now and says, I want to be my best back in January, and is trying to be back to the same fitness level in January reasonable expectation to hold for a runner? Or should the running population in India generally accept that this year is not going to be a good year in terms of
time? No, I would say straight up, you don't have to worry about that. I certainly wouldn't let that be a thought process. But I think there are a number of factors that we have to consider. The first thing is we're not out of this yet. We don't know what the next couple of weeks or months look like. We don't know how intense people should or could be training. When are gyms going to open? Leandi made reference to that. So the reality is that people having a decent home exercise ethic is probably going to be vital for months, if not years ahead. I don't know. I'm not an infectious diseases expert, but it doesn't sound like anybody really can answer this right now. So I would suggest that that's probably a priority. But then, like we do with any goals, or with any athlete or patient that comes to us, is we sit them down and, like Tvisha mentioned, in a personal environment, you say, right, well, what are your long-term goals? What are your short-term goals? The long-term goal for this guy seems to be January, he wants to perform at his best. What does he consider his best? So we start to get a couple of sort of metrics in place. What are we actually measuring this by? Is he trying to do, his first marathon? Is he trying to do a sub-3 marathon? He's never done it before. Has he always done sub-3s and he's quite happy to do 3:30? Who knows? Whatever that is, then we can work back and say, right, well, how long would you need to get there normally? And if we look at a normal runner in a normal condition, normal environment, we'd probably be looking at, for a 42K, anything from depending on how strong they are, like maybe a 12 to even a 24-week program. And that gives you plenty of time from now. So then we start looking at, right, well, where are you actually now? And then we could start to do things like testing. And this would be more Leandi's sort of space, where she would go and do the actual physical fitness testing, strength testing. What can they do? Get them onto a treadmill and see how do they run. Have they got any of these issues from their, 4 or 5 months of completely different exposure to load, like sitting in a desk for 14 hours a day. So, there are a number of factors to address. Unfortunately, not as easy as just, going, okay, well, X, Y, Z, boom, you should do this. There are a lot of things to consider.
Yeah, okay. I guess to echo what Chris has said, absolutely find out what the goals are, find out what this person wants to run in January, for example. we're not out of it yet, unfortunately. And ideally, I would also like to see them and test them, do some sort of a movement screen, do some flexibility tests, mobility tests, even core tests, things like that, to see where they are, analyze their movement, like Chris was also saying, on the treadmill, see where maybe their movement has changed because of the lockdown and sitting for too much. And then, yeah, you just kind of work back from that, and you see what they can do now. You start monitoring what they can do now, and then gradually increase the frequency of the sessions, increase the intensity of the sessions. And yeah, taking something like a RPE or heart rate, all of these things are really good to monitor where someone is now and where they could go. So again, for me, everything comes down to monitoring. It's very, very, very important. And with that, it's a useful tool to progress yourself then in the future, gradually.
Very good. I mean, the aspect of evaluating the person and doing his functional mobility test, I think is very critical. Unfortunately, most runners don't do that, and they end up with injuries, and they keep running a bad name. They're like a kid in a candy shop as soon as the lockdown is opened up, and we are like the people restricting them, telling them not to do this, and nobody wants to listen to us sitting here and talking into a computer. Let's take the questions, and I'm sure that from the questions we'll have something more developing. Good evening, Sunil. Good evening, Prashant. Dr. Shirish Kataria, good evening. Amit, thank you. Radha, good evening. Good evening, Dr. Kumar. Dr. Parag Shah is asking, should mask be worn while training? If yes, what type? I think we answered that. I think we answered this question. So we'll skip this one for the time being. There's a question about high altitude training. I mean, not very relevant, but how do you train for high altitude running, especially related to breathability? Can that training help during the COVID period?
All right. So I think for altitude training, there's it all comes down to the reason why you do it. So I think it's probably different reasons, and I don't think it will help you right now. Even though it's also a mask, right, that limit your oxygen, right? But I think people do altitude training for performance, and that's a whole different ball game again. So I think that probably if you have done high altitude training, it would have probably helped you the first month of COVID maybe, but I don't think it'll help you right now currently. And also you can't go to high altitude right now to train. So yeah, probably I think it's why you do it. So will it help? I don't know. That'll be an interesting study. But yeah, I think it's about why, for sure.
I'll just like to add the two things. One, if you're doing the high altitude training in a high altitude chamber, which typically will have one or two bikes or treadmills, which means you're going to be in a fairly secure environment. Although I don't think it's like a gym setup, which would usually, at least the high altitude chambers in Bombay that I know, I think they're shut at the moment. So I don't know where you're planning to do your high altitude training. But just in case 1 month, 2 months down the line, things open up and this particular chamber is open, if it's going to be one person inside, it's probably okay. I think you could still do it. Just in case it's a high altitude type of training which you're going to do wherein the mask is involved, then I'd say the hygiene of the mask, please take care. But I think most of them have vents. The ones which I have worked in before have vents. The ones in Chennai, which I had in the center that I worked in, they had vents. So it's a small chamber. It is a closed chamber still, and we still have. There are doubts when it comes to exercising in a closed space. But considering if you're only one person, it might be okay. So that's the first point. The second point I'll say is that because in a high altitude chamber, your SpO2 basically reduces. Please ensure that you have nothing close to COVID, because just in case you go in such an environment, you have, you are at the, you are in your initial phases, you still don't know that you're COVID positive, and your SpO2 drops in the high altitude chamber, whereas it's already less because of COVID. That can cause serious trouble. So if you're planning anything like that, please make sure you're checking your pulse ox, your saturation, you're monitoring it very, very carefully, and you've probably even got a COVID test done. So those are the 2 points that I wanted to make.
Thank you, Tvisha. The next question is from Shankar Subramanya. He says that with the mask we are exhaling the carbon dioxide back, so there's a chance of the carbon dioxide percentage being higher than what you would normally breathe. So how much of that is true? Are there any studies done around how much of the exchange of oxygen carbon dioxide happens within the mask, and is it detrimental to
so see, there's a particular way in which they say you should wear the mask, so that while inhaling, you're not really getting, there's a good suction in the mask, but while exhaling, it still allows a little bit to go out. So there is a particular way they say you can wear the mask. That's one thing. And like I said, that most of these things are a little better when you're using a cloth mask and a surgical mask. So with an N95, the problems are going to be there. So we've already said that please don't use N95s for your jogs and runs. I think between you and me, Dr. Mr. Venkatraman, we've stressed that enough. And with the surgical mask, this problem is a little bit less, and there is still a particular way to wear it. I guess if you can just look it up, I mean, there are enough videos circulating even on WhatsApp on how to wear a mask. So I think somebody should get an idea from that.
Thank you. There's a question from Vitesh Singh, but I'll ignore this because we are going to do an entire thing on that about choosing which type of shoe. So, it's clearly a little bit off the topic, so we'll not do that. And we'll get somebody to do that separately for us. Varun Rajput says, "Hi Chris, nice to see you after a long time." Thank you, Varun. Okay. Prashant, the charts will be shared. I've already said that and put it back. Varun is asking another question. Can running cause meniscus injury issues?
Everything can cause meniscus issues, really, but there's a very, I think, helpful and prominent study that came out, I think, last year, or it was published last year. And in fact, runners have healthier knees than non-running populations. So, very short answer. No, running is not bad for your knees. Yes, it can cause meniscus injuries, but so can walking up and down stairs, getting into and out of a car. It's no more dangerous than anything else for your knees. In fact, it's probably protective.
And some people get meniscus tears just because of degeneration. So
exactly, yeah. So, there's no particular risk whatsoever with running. In fact, as I said, I think it's probably more protective. Chronic loading at the right rate is probably much more protective for you than it is detrimental.
I agree. There is always this debate made between injury caused during running and injury caused due to running. And that's always up for debate about whether that happened. And I know people who have been just standing there, they just turned around and they got a meniscus tear. Somebody called them in the office and they turned around and they got a meniscus tear in their knees. So it can be as simple as that sometimes. Yeah. So the next question is from Prashant Kotari. We used to do beep tests as a cardio exercise on the terrace to keep active in running. Yes, that's right. You can do many tests to determine your aerobic capacity and determine your kind of pseudo VO2 max marker, if that is a term to use. How risky is indoor running compared to open air running? This is Ramesh Gupta. And I don't know if the question is indoor running on a treadmill or indoor running within the house as compared to open air running, but or I don't know if it is, is that the question is being asked indoor as in an enclosed place and open air as in, where the flow is free. So if Ramesh can, type and give us an explanation, then maybe we can attempt a more precise answer. I don't know if he's there or if he's gone back. So
Chris, maybe do you just want to address the indoor, assuming the indoor running, he means running around in the house that people were doing with multiple turns, you know?
Yeah, that's right. That's possibly the question. Yeah.
So yeah, I touched on this a little bit earlier, but in fact, I've had a number of patients contact me for consults based on injuries they've picked up from the abnormal practice of running in their homes. Trying to make the longest run they can in their house involving a slight bend and a turn, and they end up doing that, countless times, literally hundreds of times. These people are running 5Ks, 8Ks, 11Ks, one of my patients had, and he came to me with lateral foot pain. I mean, how many corners have you turned? How used to turning is your foot? And you've gone and done it, how many times in such a short amount of time? So I would say, it's almost a different sport. It's much like if I ask you to go and play football for 11 Ks, your likelihood of getting injured if you're not used to playing football for 11 Ks is probably quite similar. It's a completely different thing. If you're saying how good is treadmill running versus outdoor running, from a COVID point of view, I suppose it depends on the size of the environment, the ventilation in the environment, and if anyone else is there. But from the actual activity of treadmill running versus outdoor running, it's basically, again, almost two different sports, because you've got, outdoor running, you're propelling yourself forward, whereas indoor running on a treadmill, you're sort of chasing the treadmill. So you're using more flexion to move forward as opposed to propulsion to push yourself forward. Don't know if that answers the question.
Yeah, that's right. I think that kind of answer does answer the question. So the next question, I think 10 to 16 weeks of good solid-based building program from here on. If race is in March, not looking at pace only, increasing 10% mileage, what's your take? I mean, this is basically a programming to go back, and I think all the elements of a good training would be there, of consolidation weeks, and then recovery weeks, and again building up weeks. I think basically a 3-week cycle with 1 week consolidation. I mean, what's your take, Chris, on this?
Sorry, I missed the first part there. You broke up just during the question.
I think 10 to 16 weeks of good solid-based building program from here on. If race is in March, not looking at pace only, increasing 10% mileage, what's your take?
So your previous race was in March, is that right?
No, he's looking to race in March now.
Yeah.
So he's looking for a 10 to 16 weeks of base building program, which would basically be marathon level, easy aerobic runs, and then, increasing 10% mileage. So he's just asking, what's your take on trying to come back to his original level of fitness in March?
Well, look, I think we probably answered this, but I mean, that's plenty enough time. Plenty enough time. Yeah. Hello?
Yeah, I think, okay. So I think that is this. So, before we run out of questions, but I want to ask one question before we kind of wind up. We have this concept of cycles, mesocycles, macrocycles, cycles. So there is this debate that has been made in some running forums internationally, and bear in mind that in the West, this is the peak running season, and they're in lockdown. And once autumn starts, then nobody can run because often there is very cold or there's snow on the ground and stuff like that. So there is a debate that has been made, is that this year 2020 should be taken as a rest year in the macro cycle of running. If there is some term to use for a rest year, that is a number of macro cycles. So what is your take on that? And just letting it go and using this year as a rest year.
I don't think runners can do that. I don't think runners can take a rest year. I don't think it works like that in their brains, for sure. No, I don't think people will do that. No, running is, or I mean, at least for me also personally, you can't stop. You can't just say, okay, you'll run in your house if you need to and get other injuries because you love it so much. So I think it probably won't be that way for India especially. And I think probably once our second lockdown in Mumbai is over, maybe people will be able to go outside and run and just gradually increase. And the thing is, you'll probably change your targets, right? I think your focus will shift a little bit. I don't think it'll completely stop. I think probably your focus will shift. Maybe if you want to run a certain time, maybe you'll say, okay, right now you'll run this time instead of that time that you ideally want to run. But I think it'll probably just, yeah, it'll not stop. It will not be a rest here.
I know, because the imperatives of a runner to go out and run and get his fix is very high. But what's your take, Tvisha? You run a bit, and
I was about to say that if you are a heart patient, then you probably know that the cardiovascular benefits of the cardiovascular disadvantage of not doing some cardiovascular aerobic activity is fairly high. So 1 year is a long time. You'll probably end up with some kind of medical issue. If so far you have been maintaining your health with medicines plus aerobic activity, to suddenly cut out the aerobic activity and now only being dependent on medicines, it will shoot up your sugars. It will create havoc with your blood pressure, because if you were an active runner, the running was helping you to, take only 25 milligrams of a particular medicine rather than 50 milligrams. So, and I mean, we've seen people, diabetic medicines reducing, everything happening, brilliant results with running. I mean, with aerobic activity. So from the health perspective, I would say, yeah, you don't probably aim for marathons, but that little bit of aerobic basic activity which ACSM recommends of 30 to 45 minutes of activity per day, I think that should continue. That should continue come what may. And in fact, it helps build immunity. There is that the J-shaped curve. So if you're doing the right amount of exercise, it helps you build immunity and it maintains your fitness level and your health, so that your health is better. So I would say, yeah, exercise doesn't have to stop at any point. Yeah.
that's an excellent yes. Yeah, exercise shouldn't stop. But I was looking more at it from a having training goals, pace goals,
Yeah.
Performance goals. I think that should
Yes. So
you just say that this is 1 year. I'm not going to even look at that. I'm going to run. I'm going to be healthy, but I'm not going to work on my fitness.
Well, I would say, like, I agree with the sentiment, of not, you don't want to just pretend this is a normal year, certainly not. But I wouldn't go quite as far as to say, right, let's write it off completely. There's still 6 months of good quality, work that you can do on something. So maybe just change your goals, change your focus for the year. Maybe your focus is no longer, the big run in January that you were hoping for. But like I said, realistically, 6 months to train. For most of us, if you're an elite athlete, it's different. But for most of us, you can probably achieve whatever you want to do. But I'd say for even an elite athlete, it's just about changing the focus for the year. So you say, cool, this isn't the year that I'm going to break a world record, but it could be the year that I finally sort out all those old niggles, towards the back end of a season, my hamstrings always used to play up, or my back used to act up, or whatever. So you can focus on other things, and it can be a perfectly productive year. Looking back, in hindsight, you can go, oh, well, how good was 2020? I finally got rid of all of those issues. So I think it's just about reframing sort of how we're looking at, everything's an opportunity, really, depending on how you look at it. So if you just look at it as an opportunity and go, you know what, let's look at this from a different point of view, put on slightly different shaded glasses, and let's change how we're looking. Then, yeah, I think we all have to get on board. This isn't going to change. It's here. So we just have to get on board, really.
Thank you. One last question before I, wind up. Sorry, I've got too many last questions, but you talked about sleep, and that I think is very essential here. You talked about sleep, and you said, sleep is very important. You gave Roger Federer about 14 hours. I know the Kenyan athletes sleep about 16 hours. The average working athlete cannot sleep that much because he's got so many things to do. So there is this toss-up in this lockdown between, one is you are mentally stressed because of various reasons, work, career, all the other things, a very unusual circumstance that loads up the stress. And the other end, you need to sleep. So how does one solve this paradox? You need to sleep, but you can't sleep because of the stress and because of all the things that's going on in your head. So I mean, what would be your recommendation to get good high quality sleep? I mean, it's a little bit out of range, but I would like your answer.
Well, there are very good guidelines out there for sleep health. You know, sleep hygiene is a sort of a topic of its own, much like hand hygiene and gym hygiene, any other hygiene. So how you approach sleep. Technically, you want to be sticking to a schedule. So as boring as it sounds, actually having a plan for when you go to bed and when you wake up. Sleeping in a cooler environment has been shown to have better effects, and a quiet environment, which, let's be honest, in Mumbai is generally quite tricky. But, you know, yeah, I don't know. I think if Tvisha, she put up a slide there, and it was like the most basic slide, but probably the best slide of everything is your health versus your other expectations. It just comes down to what you prioritize. And based on what I said and what Tvisha said, and anyone else out there in the sort of in the space would be telling you that sleep is imperative. It's literally the most important thing. Your body rebuilds when you sleep. So even if you have the best diet on earth, your body can't do anything, or it certainly can't maximize that diet without the sleep. So you're wasting your time if you're not concentrating on sleep. There are tons of high school athletes, semi-professional athletes, or even weekend warriors out there, and they're all worried about the 1%, the 2%. I need these shoes, or I need like this fancy recovery technique, or whatever protein shake, or meal replacement, or funny massage gun thing. It's all complete rubbish. The amount of extra that gives you compared to getting in your bed at a decent hour and waking up at a decent hour and having a routine and letting your body regenerate is literally nothing. But nobody concentrates on that. So they're literally wasting 20 to 30% of the ability they have to affect their performance because they're chasing other nonsense. I don't know.
Thank you. Thank you very much. So before we wind up, Leandi, any last words, any last before we summarize?
I think, just start monitoring. I think monitoring is one of the most underrated tools. I mean, it's ever changing also. There's a lot of new research every single day about monitoring, but using something as simple as RPE and your session duration, putting that together and just start monitoring yourself. And also make sure that you do some strength training. I know among the running community, I've met many people who do not believe in strength training, but please do something, even if it's just a hip raise. That is also strength. It's really, really important that you do that, especially now while you're sitting for so many hours. Just do something. And this will all be over soon. So stay positive. It's really hard. I know it's hard, even for myself. I find that it's really hard to stay motivated, but it will be over soon. And then there are the different goals that you can do. You can go outside and run. If you're struggling to stay motivated, do get in touch with someone. Get on a new program. Try something different. Buy a kettlebell if you need to. Buy anything. Stay motivated because this will be over soon. Hopefully.
Thank you. Tvisha, do you have any last words before we wind up?
No, I think we discussed a lot. I think the closing thing would I just like to say is that if you have a target for March 2021, and just in case you're not able to meet it because if you're not able to train, don't worry. There will be a March 2022. But if something happens to your health, then that can be tricky because even if you recover everything, we still don't know what are the long-term consequences of COVID on your lung. We still don't know that. So there will be March 2022 and 2023, but it's important to preserve our bodies just now. I think the way things are happening. Yeah.
Thank you very much, Chris. Any last words before we wind up?
I suppose say thank you very much for having us. It was cool to get together, and I certainly appreciated all the other presentations as well. Looking forward to seeing you guys all when I'm back in Mumbai. But for the listeners, I think the basic messages are really, really relevant right now, and I hope that anyone who was watching will go and share these messages with their running groups and their running friends, etc. Monitor your data. It's a very easy thing to do, as Leandi said. Strength train as much as possible. It's important, and it's something that you can do relatively easily at home. Watch your load. Don't pretend it's February. Don't pretend last week was February. Don't pretend you've just run your best 10K ever. Maybe be a little bit humble, put your ego in the back pocket and start from the bottom again. But then I think also just the biggest part, as Tvisha's been banging on about, is your health. Really none of this actually matters if you're not looking after your health. So yeah, I think overall message, please go and share it. Tell everyone you can.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Chris. Thank you, Tvisha. Thank you, Leandi. Before we wind up, a note to our listeners, viewers. This video will get recorded, of course, on YouTube, Facebook page, Facebook group. My team will do the show notes. We will add all the references. We'll add links to the presentations, which you can go and see. We will put them into timestamps, so if different questions, who answered what, so you can just jump later on. So you can come back and draw more value from the video than having to sit through the entire duration of the video. So all that will be done, and there's a team that works behind this to make this happen. And thank you very much, all three of you. Thank you for taking this part of the day and educating the runners on this forum about what to really bear in mind. And I think that the takeaway is that what Tvisha said was that there will always be a March 2022 and March 2023. But if you get a contamination, if you get an injury, then that will stick with you for life probably and put you down. So I think that basically the one takeaway message is lower your expectations, be cautious, adhere to all the social distancing norms, come home, wash your hands, take a bath. So thank you, everybody.
Absolutely.
Thank you very much.
Thank you so much.
I'm just switching off and I'm going off the air.